I just wanted to share some of my thoughts, for what it's worth, about the ongoing civil unrest in the United Kingdom. The riots, of course, are ongoing, and it's truly shocking. The scenes are freely available on social media. I'm sure you've seen them. And what really inspired me to do this video, actually, was some comments that someone just sent me, actually, on WhatsApp. An article about the former Scottish First Minister, Hamza Youssef. And he said, apparently said, riots make me question my family's future in the UK. The former First Minister said the language of the far right had become institutionalized in our politics. So he's thinking perhaps of leaving the United Kingdom. And I found this quite understandable in one way, I suppose. Things can be very difficult, have become very difficult for many people. But also, it set me in a series of reflections, thinking what would happen if we followed through that logic, if we left the UK. Well, firstly, it seemed to me this would immediately play into the hands of the far right, who would dearly love us to leave the UK, and it would play into their hands directly. And also, I think many Muslims, I'm just thinking almost random examples, people like Sheikh Azra Rashid, a friend of mine, a Muslim leader in Birmingham, who is leading or heading up the Muslim community there, calling people for restraint, to get organized, to come together, to defend their communities, defend their mosques, defend their families and their homes. He was a very different kind of response, staying to fight against these aggressors, against these extremists. And I think that is a much better way of doing it, in my view. Now, I'm privileged. I'm a white guy in London, a white Muslim guy. I'm not normally a target, except silly online comments. I appreciate that. But nevertheless, I think it is better to stand and fight. There are other people, Adili Hussein from Five Pillars, who's a friend of mine, involved in organizing the Muslim community in Bedford. He sent me footage of this. Very courageous, very intelligent, well-organized communities defending themselves, their masjids and so on. This is a really good response. I mean, the game is not lost. Where it's not as bad as it could be at the moment, in my view. Now, I just wanted to make some other comments before I go on about this. About the online instigators of far right riots in the UK, because this is a real problem, and this is where I think that the former Scottish minister is right. The language of the far right has become institutionalized in some of our politics, not all of it. We're thinking of people like Nigel Farage, of course, who has this kind of weird kind of political dog whistle. So he'll say provocative things and insinuate, or more than insinuate, state that Muslims are the enemy within, which is very, very dangerous and stupid language. And then people like Tommy Robinson, of course, who are much cruder. Now he's sunning himself in Southern Europe at the moment, directing, instigating these riots from a long, long way away. GB News, this is a kind of almost mainstream news channel. Farage is part of that in the UK. They're constantly demonizing Muslims. Almost every program is singling out Muslims for misrepresentation and slander. It's quite shocking. You get minor figures like Lawrence Fox, the former actor turned radical, who's openly called for the banning of Islam from Britain. And then even more extreme people like Paul Golding and this former Church of England minister, Reverend Calvin Robinson, who's a self-styled Christian minister who often comes out with the most nasty anti-Muslim statements. And then, unfortunately, people like Andrew Tate have said things which are extremely regrettable, and so on. So, and even mainstream media like the Times, the London Times newspaper, which I read most days just to keep informed with what they're saying about the world, you get this drip sense of Muslims are the problem, that they are a threat, that even when they practice their faith, they are a danger to, and it goes on and on. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes not so subtle. I see it also in the Telegraph, which is clearly promoting a very Zionist agenda in its demonization of Muslims. Leading Zionist figures are all over the paper, sort of constantly defending the genocide and attacking Muslims. I mentioned GB News. There are exceptions to this. Guardian newspaper is usually is not Islamophobic, but you know. So I think the former minister Hamza Yusuf is right. There is an institutionalization of far right tropes and language in some of our media, the media I've mentioned, and obviously in the former Conservative government, which has now just left office, a former Home Secretary there, basically calling pro-Palestinian demonstrators evil and criminal and pro-terrorist, and it totally slanderous attacks on our democratic right to protest against genocide and attacks on Palestinians. And there was awful language. So she, who shall not be named, whipping up hatred towards Muslims and pro-Palestinian the political figures as well. So it isn't all sides really, from the previous government, from absolutely prominent, influential media outlets like the Times and the Telegraph, GB News to a lesser extent, Daily Mail, of course, which one has to hold one's nose to even look at, is so vile. But that is apparently the most widely read English language newspaper online in the world. That's also very anti-Muslim as well. So yes, there is a point, but I do think that we should stand and fight. That if things got worse, and they might do, God forbid they do, we have a precedent in our tradition, the Hijra from Mecca to Medina, when the Prophet, upon him be peace, and his companions were suffering extreme persecution and torture and boycotts and so on. They left and they found a new home elsewhere. So yes, of course, but I don't think we're there yet. And you see, the logic of just leaving the UK, or thinking about Muslims thinking about leaving here at the moment, in this situation, is that what do we say to the Palestinians? Do we follow this logic and say, well, things are obviously very bad for you there in the West Bank, in Gaza, you should just leave. Maybe you should just leave and go to Africa or to the West or wherever, because it's clearly extremely, now what's happened to them is almost beyond comprehension. And we see it on our Twitter feed and so on. But would we suggest that they would leave and give over Palestine to the occupiers, give Palestine over to the colonialists because it's difficult? Now, I'm not in their position. I can't tell Palestinians what to do. But within our tradition, indeed in international law, people do have the right to defend themselves, and if necessary, by taking up arms. Now, I'm not saying we should take up arms in the UK, that we're not in that situation at all. But other people who are occupied brutally by brutal military regimes do have a right to resist. And so this is a valid option in international law and Islamically too. So I'm saying, in my view, I think we should stay and fight. We should organize. People are organizing. We should urge restraint. We shouldn't retaliate. We shouldn't attack random people on the street. Normally, that's not happening. And we should, make the best of the situation we can. If it gets worse, then we should consider it on a case-by-case basis. But at the moment, I don't think we're there. And I appreciate, as I say, I'm slightly privileged position, but I don't see, when I look around the world, that we are in a position yet where it's such an emergency that we must leave this country. This, for the vast majority of Muslims in this country, this is our home. We have homes here, we have jobs, we have roots in schools, communities, we contribute in many, many ways to British life. And for us to talk about leaving is to play into the hands of the far right, who would like nothing better for us to say that. I think we should stay and fight. Now, well, let's see what happens, though. I think the riots are going to sort of fizzle out. The state appears to be taking control. It's arresting people. It's processing prosecutions very quickly through these 24-hour courts, apparently. I think the situation will be controlled again. It doesn't mean everything's back to normal. There is no normal anymore. But there's also, as someone was saying to me yesterday, there's a wider political context to this. Since October last year, and also the attacks on Palestine, on Gaza, there has been a heightening of rhetoric against Muslims and against Palestinians. It's not what it was a year ago, I think. Things are getting hotter and hotter. There has been a change, and this is throughout the West, not just here in the UK. So I'm mindful of that, and we need to keep our eyes open every day to what's going on. There are influences behind the scenes, I think, manipulating and stirring, maybe Zionist influences and other factors, seeking to manipulate people's feelings in the UK against Muslims, maybe to distract from what's going on elsewhere, or maybe for other nefarious purposes. I'm open to that idea of behind the scenes actors trying to, as I say, manipulate the public through the media and through instigation of Tommy Robinson, of course, is well known to be supported and funded by certain Zionist people legally and financially. That's well documented. That's not a conspiracy theory. You can easily find the evidence for that online. So there's stuff going on more than just a few extremists and EDL supporters rioting. There's other stuff. And there are other issues to do with immigration and asylum and so on, all thrown into the mix, which have been whipped up into this violent frenzy. So, gosh, it's difficult and toxic time. But at this stage, I don't think we should be running away, leaving the country. Now, obviously, people can do what they wish, and individuals may feel that they can't stay. But I really think we need to be careful about this language. It can appear to be defeatist. My preference is to stay and fight, to organize within the law, of course, and we will see what happens next. If things get worse, then we need to then revisit whatever options there are. We need to always be mindful of all our options. But at the moment, I think we should stay, resist, and fight, and not give in to the temptation just to run away, any more than we would advise the Palestinians just to leave Palestine. Although whatever they did, I'm not saying what they shouldn't do, but resistance is a duty sometimes. When we can resist, we should do so. Anyway, that's the end of my rant. Please leave your comments, your thoughts in the section below, and inshallah, we will revisit this issue from time to time.